Jim mentions China. Let's get to China, as that country does retaliate against these tariffs. Our Eunice Yoon is in Beijing with the latest. Hi, Eunice.
Hey, Carl. Well, the Chinese government, as you guys had mentioned, had threatened all necessary measures, countermeasures, when it comes to their reaction. But this batch actually was relatively limited. Minutes after President Trump's tariffs had kicked in, China announced tariffs on the agricultural sector for the main part. This was 10 to 15% tariffs on imports of soybeans, sorghum, beef, fruits, chicken, corn, cotton, wheat. Some of the, in one case, or in some of the cases, China is the biggest buyer of these products, such as soybeans and cotton. During President Trump's first trade war, China had also targeted agricultural products, and at that time it was really seen as a political calculation that China would want to target President Trump's political base. Now, this time the Chinese also imposed various business restrictions on more than 25 companies. 10 of them were added to an unreliable entity list, so they're blacklisted. 15 added to export control list. A lot of these firms are for the most part in the defense industry, don't have a whole lot of business in China, if any at all, and had already been sanctioned by Beijing. The one interesting company was among all of these was Illumina. This was the company that had been blacklisted in February after President Trump's February tariffs had kicked in. That company has now been banned from importing its gene sequencer machines, and China does account for 7% of Illumina's sales. That was the most high-profile corporate among the group, so it does give you a sense that we're seeing a lot of action, a lot of noise with these measures, but no household names.
Eunice, our Commerce Secretary was on a few moments ago, really emphasizing the element about fentanyl. And the Journal piece today reads, Chinese officials have said in recent weeks that U.S. tariffs make them less likely to help solve the fentanyl problem. Is that true?
For President Xi Jinping, he is not going to be like the Canadian or Mexican leaders, not going to be seen as somebody who would pick up the phone and try to work something out with President Trump and be seen as kind of bending the knee to President Trump, to the Chinese public. So President Xi would probably go to Trump on his own terms. And that is really important for the Chinese leadership to make sure that their public knows that, or at least believes that, President Xi is in control.
Eunice, when it comes to some of these agricultural products, chicken, wheat, corn, cotton, 15% tariffs, are there other places the Chinese are going to be able to go to find those kinds of agricultural products at a lesser price? Do you know?
Yeah, definitely. They've been doing this. They've been diversifying since 2018. So they've been moving to looking at Brazil for the most part for, say, corn. They've been trying to reduce a lot of their reliance on the U.S. when it comes to these agricultural products. And that's expected to continue, especially in this climate.
Now, Eunice, I also remember, I'm sure we had a conversation around this at the time, when we reached, under the last Trump administration, there was a deal reached with China in some way that involved them buying a lot of agricultural products. I don't remember the exact target number, but I don't believe it was ever met.
Right. That has been one of the sticking points that the Trump administration, as well as a lot of other folks in the U.S., have said about that 2020 trade deal, the Phase 1 trade deal. There's been some discussion, though, ironically here, that the Chinese will want to return to that 2020 Phase 1 trade deal, that they would agree to buy a lot of U.S. products, not only agricultural products, but from their perspective, a lot of high-tech products, and not something necessarily that the U.S. Would want to see. But there is this belief that the Chinese leadership does prefer going back to that kind of grander economic deal.
Yep, Phase 1, that's a deep track, Eunice. You will talk soon. Eunice Yoon in Beijing this morning.